The Arizona frontier of 1878 was not a place of mercy. It was a land of dust blood and hard choices. For Josephine Reed, a 19-year-old girl tougher than the boot leather, she wore a simple walk to the river turned into a choice that could cost her everything. She found a bundle in the reeds, and inside wasn't a coyote pup or a lost doll. It was a living, starving baby, its skin the color of the red earth, wrapped in a blanket that marked it as the mortal enemy of her people. To save him meant risking a war. To leave him meant losing her soul. The high desert wind had a voice. It was a lonely, keening sound that scraped across the plains of the Arizona Territory, promising nothing but more dust. Josephine Reed, known to everyone in the valley as Josie, pulled her shawl tighter. At 19, her hands were already chapped and calloused, her face weathered by a sun that took no prisoners. Her father Hezekiah Reed called this land God's anvil, the place he hammered the weakness out of a man. Josie just thought it was empty. Their homestead was a squat sod and timber cabin miles from the next nearest neighbor, a man named Matthias Fry, and even further from the dusty collection of tents and false-fronted stores called Holbrook. Josie. Hezekiah's voice was like gravel pouring from a bucket. The water barrels are low, and check the snares by the cottonwoods. Tom's useless for it. Her younger brother Tom, who was 15, and all elbows and apologies, flinched from the porch. "I'll go, Pa." "You'll stay," Hezekiah grunted, not looking up from the harness he was mending. "You'll spook whatever's in 'em. Josie, go." Josie nodded, grabbed the 2 heavy wooden buckets, and began the half-mile walk to the little Colorado River. The river was low this time of year, a muddy ribbon of brown water cutting through the pale, dry earth. The silence was absolute, broken only by her own footsteps and the cry of a distant hawk. She reached the bank, knelt by a relatively clear patch of water, and dipped the first bucket. It was as she was pulling it out, water sloshing over the rim, that she heard it. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a hawk. It was a thin, desperate sound, like a kitten mewling. Josie froze. Her eyes scanned the dense thicket of willow and tamarisk 20 yards downstream. The sound came again, weak but unmistakable. Her first thought was a wildcat. Her second worse was a coyote den. She set the bucket down, her heart thumping against her ribs. She should have brought her father's rifle. She picked up a heavy, smooth river stone, balanced it in her palm, and moved slowly. The sound was coming from a pile of driftwood and reeds, almost hidden in the muddy bank. As she got closer, she saw it. It wasn't an animal. It was a bundle of cloth, a woven blanket of striking red, black, and gray patterns, a Navajo blanket. Josie's blood ran cold. Tensions were still brittle. The long walk to Bosque Redondo was a fresh, bleeding wound in the memory of the territory. The Navajo had been allowed back to their lands, but the peace was a thin sheet of ice. A settler finding anything of theirs, or them finding anything of a settler's, was a spark near a powder keg. The blanket moved. The sound came again, a desperate, gasping cry. "Lord, preserve us," she whispered. Her hands trembling, she pulled back the damp wool. Inside, nestled in rabbit fur, was a baby. It couldn't have been more than a few days old. Its skin was the color of polished copper, its face pinched and blue with cold and hunger. Its tiny dark eyes were squeezed shut as it let out another piercing, breathless wail. It was starving. It was freezing. It was alone. Josie looked wildly up and down the riverbank. There were no tracks, no sign of a mother, no camp. Just the wind and the empty staring sky. Who would do this? Who could leave a child to die? Around the baby's neck on a simple leather thong was a single perfect piece of blue turquoise shaped like a bear claw. It was a sign. This child was not unwanted. He was lost. She looked at the stone in her hand, then at the baby. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Don't you go borrowing trouble, girl. We got enough of our own." This wasn't trouble. This was a human life. "Okay," she whispered to the child, her voice shaking. "Okay, we're going to be quiet now." She ripped a long strip from the hem of her wool petticoat, dipped it in the river, and squeezed the cool water into the baby's mouth. He gagged, then suckled weakly. She had no choice. She couldn't leave him. Josie scooped up the tiny light bundle, tucked it securely inside her own thick canvas coat, and abandoned the water buckets. She ran. She ran all the way back to the homestead, the baby's faint warmth against her chest, and the weight of the turquoise amulet, feeling as heavy as a blacksmith's anvil. She burst through the cabin door, breathless. Hezekiah looked up, his face darkening at the sight of her empty hands. "Where's the water? What did you—" He stopped, his eyes fixed on the bundle clutched in her arms. "Josie, what is that?" Tom stood up from the table, his eyes wide. Josie's hands fumbled with her coat, revealing the dark-haired head and the Navajo blanket. The silence in the cabin was suddenly suffocating. Hezekiah's face, already weathered, seemed to crack into deeper lines. He didn't move for a full 10 seconds. "Get it out," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "Pa, he's starving. He was by the river. Alone." "I said," Hezekiah repeated, rising slowly to his full gaunt height. "Get it out, now." "I can't. He'll die." Josie's voice broke a plea and a defiance all at once. There was no one, just him. Left for dead. "He ain't him," Hezekiah snapped his voice, finally rising. "He's it. It's a they. It's a redskin, Josephine. Do you have any idea what you've just brought into this house? That's not a baby. That's a bullet. That's a fire. That's a war party at our door, asking questions we can't answer." He grabbed her arm. "You take it back. You leave it where you found it. It ain't our concern." "Hezekiah, no!" Josie wrenched her arm free, shielding the infant. "I won't. I don't care. It's a baby. You can't ask me to do that. You can't—" "I'm not asking!" he roared, raising a hand. "Pa, stop!" Tom shouted, jumping between them. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice to his father. "She's right, Pa. It's just a baby. Look at it." Hezekiah froze his hand in the air. He stared at his son, then at the child, whose cries had weakened to a pathetic wheezing gasp. The baby was too weak to even cry properly. Hezekiah Reed was a hard man, but he was not a monster. He was a man ruled by a deep, pragmatic fear. He saw the world in terms of survival. This baby was a threat to that survival. He dropped his hand and turned away, running his fingers through his thinning grey hair. "It can't stay in the house. I won't have it in the house. I won't have its people finding it here, thinking we stole it." "They won't," Josie said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "They won't. I'll hide him." "Where?" Josie looked at the trapdoor near the hearth. "The root cellar." Hezekiah closed his eyes. "One day," he said, his voice hollow. "You feed it. You get it strong. And then you take it to Fort Wingate. Let the soldiers deal with it. I want it gone, Josie. By sunrise, day after tomorrow." He didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed his rifle from the wall mount and stalked out of the cabin. For the next several hours, the cabin was a place of frantic, whispered conspiracy. While Tom kept watch, Josie created a makeshift nursery in the damp, cool dark of the cellar, lining an old apple crate with her softest wool shawl. The real problem was food. They had one milk goat, Bess. Josie milked her, but the milk was too strong. "We need to water it," she said to Tom, her brow furrowed in concentration. "And sugar. We need sugar." "Pa keeps the molasses locked in the supply shed," Tom said. "Then get the file," Josie ordered. "And be quiet." Tom slipped out. Josie went back to the cellar. The baby was breathing in shallow, raspy jerks. She cleaned him as best she could with a damp cloth. The turquoise amulet was cool against her fingers. It was clearly valuable. This was no outcast child. Something terrible had happened. Tom returned his face, pale but triumphant, carrying a small tin of dark, sweet molasses. "Pa's checking the south fence line. He'll be gone till dusk." They mixed the warm goat's milk with water and a tiny drop of molasses. Josie fashioned a crude teat from a piece of clean leather, dipped it in the mixture, and touched it to the baby's lips. At first he didn't respond. His eyes were closed, his breathing faint. "Come on," Josie whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Please, don't you die on me. Not now. You fight. You hear me? You fight." She dripped the milk onto his tongue. He gagged, then miraculously his mouth latched on. A tiny, weak sucking motion began. Josie and Tom locked eyes over the crate. The baby drank. He drank for a full minute before falling back into an exhausted but slightly less death-like sleep. Josie sat back on the dirt floor, the lantern light casting huge shadows on the walls. She had bought him a few hours, but her father's deadline loomed. Fort Wingate was 3 days' ride. The baby wouldn't make it. And even if he did, what then? She was trapped. Trapped by the baby's needs, her father's fear, and the vast, dangerous empty of the land outside. The next day was a torment of lies. Hezekiah stomped around the homestead, pointedly, ignoring the trapdoor. Josie and Tom worked in a silent, synchronized ballet of deception. One would work in the garden or mend tack, while the other slipped into the cellar to feed the child whose name they had taken to calling Moses for the obvious reason. Moses was weak, but his cries were stronger. The goat's milk and molasses administered every 2 hours were working. Late in the afternoon, a rider approached. It wasn't Hezekiah who was out hunting. It was a single man on a tall, fine-looking bay gelding. "Tom, get inside," Josie said, her stomach tightening. "Now, and stay quiet." She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the sun. The rider was Matthias Fry. He was a man who owned or leased most of the valley. He was large, with a thick neck and a prosperous belly that strained his waistcoat. He was clean-shaven, which was unusual, and his eyes were a pale, cold blue. He was polite, but his politeness always felt like a threat. "Miss Reed," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He didn't dismount. "A fine afternoon. Mr. Fry, my father's not here. He's hunting." "A shame." Fry said, his gaze drifting over the homestead. He looked at the water barrel, the small garden, the penned goats. "I'm just checking my fences. Lost a few head of cattle up near the Painted Desert. Thought they might have drifted south." "We haven't seen any," Josie said, forcing her hands to stay steady at her sides. "No, I don't suppose you have." Fry's horse shifted, and he leaned forward on his saddle horn, his smile not reaching his eyes. "It's a hard land. Easy to lose things out here." His gaze stopped on the milk goat Bess, who was bleating by her pen. "That's a fine-looking goat," he said conversationally. "Giving good milk, is she? She's new." Josie lied. "We're trying to wean a calf." Fry raised an eyebrow. "Wean a calf with goat's milk. That's a new one on me, Miss Reed. Your father trying some new husbandry." "It was my idea," Josie said quickly. "The calf's mother. She fell in a ravine." Fry stared at her. The silence stretched. Josie could feel a bead of sweat tracing a cold path down her spine. She could hear faintly the muffled cry of the baby from beneath her feet. Fry's smile tightened. A ravine? Of course. Well, you be careful, Miss Reed. He turned his attention to the east toward the river. There's sign down there, a lot of it. Sign Navajo, he said, and the word was a curse. They're getting bold, riding where they shouldn't. I found a disturbance down by the tamarisk grove. Looked like a coyote den at first, but it was men's work. Josie's heart felt like it had stopped. The tamarisk grove, that's where I found him. You should tell your father to be watchful. Fry continued, his voice smooth. These disturbances, they need to be cleaned up. Can't have that kind of filth so close to decent folk. It attracts scavengers. He tipped his hat again. You tell Hezekiah I called, and good luck with that. Calf. He turned his horse and rode away at a slow, deliberate walk. Josie stayed on the porch until he was just a speck of dust, her knuckles white as she gripped the porch rail. He knew. He didn't know what he knew, but he knew she was lying. And his talk of a disturbance by the river, it wasn't a warning. It was a boast. She ran inside and threw open the trap door. Tom was sitting on the steps, white-faced. He heard him. Tom whispered, his voice trembling. Josie, he was right over the door. He heard him cry. Josie grabbed the baby. Moses was warm. His fever had broken. He looked at her with wide, dark, inquisitive eyes. He was a survivor. Her father's deadline was sunrise. Fort Wingate was impossible. But now staying here was too. Matthias Fry was not a man to leave a mystery unsolved, and he was not a man who liked Navajo. Josie realized with dawning horror that Fry likely hadn't found a disturbance. He'd made it. She had to get the baby out. Not to the fort. She had to take him home. Back to the Navajo. It was the only way to save him. And now the only way to save her own family. Night fell like a hammer. The wind picked up, shrieking around the corners of the cabin, making the single lantern flicker. The sound was a perfect cloak for the baby's occasional cry, but it also shredded Josie's nerves. Hezekiah returned empty-handed and foul-tempered. He slammed his rifle into the rack and didn't speak, just ate his stew of salt pork and beans in a grim silence. Josie and Tom exchanged a look. The plan was set. Josie would wait until her father was in his deepest sleep, just before dawn. She would take Buster, her father's strongest and fastest horse. She had packed a satchel, a skin of the goat's milk mixture, a handful of dried jerky for herself, and the baby's blanket. But the night turned against them. Around midnight, Josie slipped down into the cellar for a final feeding before the journey. The baby felt wrong. He was hot. Not warm, but burningly hot. When she put the leather teat to his lips, he turned his head and let out a dry, rasping cough that shook his tiny frame. No, she whispered, panic seizing her. No, not now. She brought him up into the cabin, risking her father's wrath. Tom was asleep by the cold hearth, but he woke instantly. What is it? It's a fever, a lung fever. Listen. The baby's breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. He was drowning in his own lungs. We need to break it, Josie said, her mind racing. She was her mother's daughter. She knew herbs. Tom, the fire. Build it up. We need hot water. And get the mullein, the dried leaves hanging by the chimney. For the next 2 hours they fought for his life. They brewed a weak, bitter mullein tea, forcing drops of it past his lips. Josie made a poultice of fried onions and lard, wrapping it in a cloth and laying it steaming hot on his tiny chest. The cabin filled with the sharp, pungent smell. The baby's wails were weak, breathless gasps. The noise and the smell finally woke Hezekiah. He emerged from his small bedroom, his face a mask of thunder. What in God's name? I told you! He stopped when he saw the scene. Josie, her face streaked with soot, and tears desperately pressing the poultice. Tom frantically stoking the fire, and the baby slick with sweat, convulsing with a cough. "He's dying," Josie stated. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. "My remedies aren't working. He's too little." Hezekiah stared at the child. The righteous, fearful anger in his eyes faded, replaced by something ancient and grim. He had seen this before. He had buried a wife and 2 other children in this hard land. He knew this sound. "It's the lung fever," he said, his voice flat. "He won't make the night." "He will," Josie insisted, her voice raw. "He has to. You did what you could, girl. But it's done." He looked at the window where the blackness was just beginning to fade to a bruised, deep purple. "Sunrise. The deadline's here. It's too late to take him to the fort." "I wasn't going to the fort," Josie said, meeting his gaze. Hezekiah's eyes widened slightly. "You were... What, riding to them? Are you insane? They'd kill you before you got within a mile. They'd see the baby and think you were the one who did whatever this was." "It's his only chance," Josie pleaded. "They have medicine. They're healers. I've heard the stories. They can fix this." "It's suicide, Josephine. It's his life," she shot back. "And maybe ours, too." Mr. Fry was here. She relayed the conversation, her words short and sharp. The mention of the disturbance by the river, the questions about the goat's milk, the coldness in his eyes. Hezekiah's face went pale. He knew Fry. He knew what the man was capable of. Fry didn't just suspect. He was hunting. He thinks we were involved," Hezekiah whispered. "He thinks we're hiding, or helping." "I don't know what he thinks," Josie said, bundling the baby who had fallen into a shallow, wheezing sleep. "But I know we can't be found with him, and I won't let him die in this cellar. My choice. I'm taking him." She strode to the door, grabbing the satchel. "Josie," Hezekiah yelled, "you take that horse, you ride out with that child. Fry will see. He'll know. He'll come for us. For Tom." "Then you stop me." Josie challenged, her hand on the latch. Hezekiah looked at his daughter, her frame silhouetted against the pale dawn. He saw her mother's stubbornness, her mother's fire. He looked at Tom, who was watching him with terrified, pleading eyes. And he looked at the dying infant in his daughter's arms. His shoulders slumped. He walked to the gun rack, but instead of his rifle, he took down his old heavy buffalo coat. "You're a fool," he said, his voice thick. He threw the coat at her. "An addled-brained fool, but you're my blood. This won't keep you warm, but it'll block the wind. Your shawl's too thin." He then grabbed his rifle. "Go. Out the back. Keep to the arroyo. I'll take the wagon into town. Make it look like I'm going for supplies. I'll try and draw Fry's eye if he's watching. Get him looking west, not east." Josie stared at him, stunned. "Go!" he roared, his voice breaking. Before I change my mind, Josie ran. She saddled Buster in the pre-dawn chill, the horse's breath pluming. She mounted, settling the sick baby against her chest inside the heavy coat. She gave one last look at her father, who stood on the porch, a lonely, broken figure. Then she kicked Buster into a run, heading east into the rising sun and the unknown, hostile lands of the Navajo. The land was a brutal, beautiful enemy. Josie rode Buster hard, keeping to dry riverbeds and the shadow of shallow canyons, avoiding the high ridges. The sun climbed, and the territory that had been deep purple and shadow at dawn turned into a blinding expanse of red rock and pale yellow grass. Every scrub juniper looked like a man on horseback. Every hawk's cry sounded like a warning. The baby nestled in the buffalo coat was terrifyingly quiet. His fever was raging. Twice Josie had to stop dismount and clear his tiny mouth of phlegm, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely do it. She dripped water onto his lips, but he wouldn't take it. "Hold on, Moses," she murmured against his hair. "Just hold on. We're getting close, I promise." But she was riding blind. She had a general idea of where the Navajo summer camps were, in the high plateaus near the sacred mountain, but she had never dared to ride this deep into their territory. She was trespassing. She was a white girl alone, carrying a Diné child. Her father's words haunted her. "They'd kill you before you got within a mile." She knew the stories. She knew the anger was still fresh. She could be shot on sight. But what choice did she have? Fry was behind her, and death was in her arms. By midday, the horse-buster was lathered and limping. He'd thrown a shoe. Josie dismounted in a narrow slot canyon, the red walls rising 100 feet on either side. It was cool, and there was a small seep of water. She let Buster drink while she checked on the baby. His breathing was so shallow she had to put her ear to his chest to hear it. He was fading. "No," she sobbed, sinking against the canyon wall. "Please God, no. Not after all this. I can't do it." She was alone. She was lost. She had failed. She closed her eyes, the tears cutting clean paths through the grime on her face. A pebble skittered down the canyon wall from above. Josie's head snapped up. She grabbed for the hunting knife on her belt, her only weapon. Above her on the canyon rim, a man was watching. He was not Matthias Fry. He was on a paint pony, and he was Navajo. He wore a simple tunic and leggings, his black hair tied back in a tsiyo. He held a rifle across his lap, and he was as still as the rock he sat on. He wasn't alone. 2 more riders appeared, fanning out on the ridge. They had been watching her for miles. Josie stood slowly, her knife in her hand, but she made no move to raise it. She pulled back the flap of the heavy coat, revealing the baby. She held him up, an offering. A plea. "Help!" she cried out, her voice echoing off the walls. "Please, he's sick. Your child. He's sick, in medicine. Please." She didn't know if they understood her. The man on the rim stared at her, his face impassive. He said something to his companions, his voice too low to hear. Then he did something she didn't expect. He raised his hand, palm out, and slowly, deliberately began to ride down a narrow switchback path into the canyon. Josie's heart hammered. This was it. Mercy or death. As he drew closer, she saw his face. He was young, no older than her, but his eyes were ancient. He stopped 10 feet away, his gaze flicking from her face to the knife to the baby. He spoke, his voice soft. "Where you find?" Josie was so flooded with relief that he spoke English she nearly collapsed. "The river. By my home. 3 days ago. He was alone. Starving." She pointed to the baby's chest. "Fever. Lung fever. He's dying. I was bringing him to you. For medicine. A healer." The man's eyes narrowed. He looked at the baby, and his expression, which had been hard and suspicious, softened into something else. Recognition. He dismounted. He walked toward her, and Josie forced herself not to flinch. He was close enough now that she could smell the pine smoke and wool of his clothes. He reached out not for the baby, but for the turquoise amulet. He touched it with one finger. "This is Yaj," he whispered, "the son of Hastinso." He looked at her, and his eyes were full of a terrible cold grief. "His mother is Zaniba. We have been looking. We found her." "Found her?" Josie asked, dreading the answer. "Dead," the warrior said, his voice flat. "Murdered, by the river, with 2 others. Their horses, their silver, gone." Josie's blood turned to ice. Fry. The disturbance by the river. They thought all were dead, the man said. We did not look for a baby. We thought. He looked at the child in her arms. You rode east. You did not ride to the fort. The fort is too far, Josie said, her voice shaking. He would have died. The warrior nodded. He turned and called up to his companions on the rim. It was a fast, urgent command. One of them immediately turned his horse and rode away at a gallop. The warrior turned back to Josie. I am Kea. You will come. We go to Hastien Tso. He is hunting. He is hunting the man who did this. He looked at the baby. My Shiyaj. My nephew. We must be fast. He put his hand on the baby's head. It was a gesture so gentle, so full of love, that Josie's last wall of fear crumbled. He's not breathing well, she whispered. Kea looked at the sky. We are 2 hours from the camp. My grandmother is a healer. But he is very sick. He looked at Buster, the limping horse. You will ride with me. He mounted his pony in one fluid motion, then reached down a powerful arm and pulled Josie up, seating her in front of him. She settled the baby, and Kea wrapped a blanket around all 3 of them. Hold on, he said. He urged the pony into a steady, ground-eating lope, leaving Buster the canyon and Josie's old life behind. They rode for an hour, pushing deeper into the red rock labyrinth. The land was changing, growing more sacred and severe. Kea did not speak, his focus entirely on the horse and the trail. Josie concentrated on a single, desperate task, keeping the baby breathing. The steady rhythm of the horse seemed to be jarring the sickness in his lungs, and each cough sounded weaker than the last. The sun was past its zenith, beginning its long slide into the west, when Kea suddenly reined in the pony. He pulled off the trail, backing the horse into the deep shadow of an overhang. What is it? Josie whispered. Kea put a hand on her arm, demanding silence. He was listening. Josie listened too. At first she heard nothing but the wind. Then she caught it, the metallic sound of shod horses on rock. More than one, coming fast. Kea's body tensed. He drew the rifle from its scabbard. Not our people, he whispered. Their horses are shod. Josie's stomach twisted. Shod horses. Her father's horse. Or, how many? She breathed. 3, maybe 4. They ride hard. Kea's eyes were scanning the canyon trail ahead. They followed your tracks, the shod horse. They are hunters. Fry. It had to be. Hezekiah had gone west to town. Fry must have cut her trail, seen her riding east, and known his loose end was getting away. He knew she was heading for the Navajo, and he couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let the witness and the evidence the baby reach them. It's him, Josie said, her voice tight with terror. The man I told you about. The one who did it. He's coming for the baby. Kea's face became a mask of cold fury. He hunts a child. He will find a warrior. He looked at Josie. They will be on us in a minute. I can try to outrun them, but the baby... He can't take it, Josie said. The ride will kill him. Then we fight. He looked at the narrow pass ahead. Give me the child. What? Give me the child. Take my horse. Ride. As fast as you can. North. Follow the dry wash. You will find our camp. Find Azza Tso, the old woman. My grandmother. Give her the baby. Go! He was trying to slide her off the horse. No, Josie said, clutching the baby. He'll kill you. It's 3 against 1. He will not find my chief's son. Kea said, his voice hard. Go. No, I won't leave you. She looked around frantically. The tracks. He's following my tracks. He doesn't know you're here. A desperate, terrible idea formed in her mind. He's hunting me, she said, thinking aloud. He thinks I'm alone. Give me your rifle. Kea stared at her. You cannot fight 3 men. I can hide. You take the baby. Ride to your camp. Get the healer. You're faster alone. He's not following you. He'll follow me." She was making a trade, her life for the baby's. Kea saw the resolve in her eyes. He saw the logic. He had a duty to his chief's son. He made his choice. "Stay in the rocks," he said. He handed her the rifle. It was heavy and warm. "Do not show yourself until you must. I will bring help." He slid off the horse, and Josie took the reins. He stepped forward, and with infinite gentleness took the baby from her arms. He wrapped the child in his own blanket, securing him to his chest. "May the holy people guide you, white girl," he whispered. He turned and scrambled up the rock face, disappearing into the maze of sandstone like a ghost. Josie was alone. She dismounted, slapping the pony's rump to send it further down the canyon out of sight. She chambered a round in the rifle. She checked the load. 5 bullets, 3 men. She scrambled up the opposite side of the trail, finding a narrow crevice between 2 boulders. It gave her a clear view of the trail for 50 yards in either direction. She rested the heavy barrel on the rock. She didn't wait long. The sound of the shod horses grew louder. Then they appeared. Matthias Fry was in the lead. His face was dark with sweat and fury. Behind him were 2 men, his foreman Kester and another hard-case ranch hand. They all had rifles drawn. They saw her horses' tracks. They saw Buster's tracks. They saw where they had mingled. "She's close!" Fry snarled, dismounting. "She met someone. Kester, check that wash. Pike up on the ridge." "Mr. Fry," Kester said, looking nervously at the high canyon walls. "This is bad country. This is their country." "It's my country if I say it is," Fry roared. "I'm not letting that girl and that brat get to their camp. You find them both. I want that blanket, and I want that blue rock she was carrying." Josie's blood ran cold. He hadn't just seen the baby. He'd seen the amulet. He was after the jewelry. It was murder for greed. Kester moved up the trail, walking right toward her hiding place. He was 20 yards away, 15. Josie's hands were slick. She centered the rifle sight on his chest. I can't just shoot him." She aimed at the rock just above his head and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening, echoing like a cannon in the narrow space. The bullet sparked, sending rock chips flying into Kester's face. He screamed and dove for cover, firing blindly into the rocks. "There!" Fry yelled. "She's in the rocks, left side, pin her down." Bullets ripped through the air, thudding into the sandstone around her, whining as they ricocheted. Josie huddled down her heart, trying to escape her chest. "You're trapped, girl," Fry shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Give it to me. Give me the baby and I'll let you walk out of here." "He's not here!" Josie screamed back, her voice high with terror. "I don't have him." A cold laugh. "Liar, throw him out, or we're coming in and we won't be gentle." She had to move. She was trapped. She fired again, aiming at Fry's position, and used the shot's echo to scramble from her crevice, moving higher up the canyon wall. A bullet tore through the sleeve of her coat, stinging her arm. She cried out, falling behind a slab of rock. "She's hit," Pike yelled from the ridge. "I see her. She's moving up. Don't kill her," Fry roared. "Not yet. I want to know who she talked to." They were advancing. Kester was moving along the canyon floor and Fry was climbing the rocks opposite her. They were creating a crossfire. She was hopelessly, fatally trapped. She raised the rifle one last time, aiming at Kester. "I have to. It's him or me." She closed her eyes, and a new sound filled the air. Not a rifle shot. It was a high, ululating cry, a war cry. Josie opened her eyes. On the ridge above Fry, the ridge Pike was supposed to be on, were 5 Navajo warriors. Kea was with them, and beside him, on a magnificent black horse, was a man who seemed to be carved from the rock itself. He was tall and broad, his face a mask of terrible righteous fury. He wore a silver concho belt, and his expression was one of absolute grief and vengeance. This was Hastin Tso. Fry looked up. His face, which had been contorted with rage, collapsed into pure terror. No! Pike, the man on the ridge, was already dead, an arrow protruding from his chest. "He is the one!" Kea yelled, pointing. "The B.A. Wichioi, red shirt! He murdered Zanibar!" Hastin Tso let out a roar that seemed to shake the very stones. It was not a battle cry. It was a scream of pure, unfiltered pain. The warriors descended. It was not a fight. It was a judgment. Josie didn't watch. She huddled behind her rock, pressing her face into the stone, and listened to the terrible, swift sounds of the end. The confrontation lasted less than a minute. The canyon fell silent. The only sounds, the terrified snorting of Fry's horses and the harsh, ragged breathing of men. Josie stayed hidden, her entire body shaking. The rifle was heavy in her lap. She was no longer a threat, but she was still a Bilagana, a white person in the heart of a war party that had just exacted its vengeance. She heard footsteps on the gravel approaching her position. "You can come out, white girl," Kea's voice called. He sounded exhausted. Josie stood up slowly, her hands raised, leaving the rifle behind. Kester and Fry were on the canyon floor. They were not dead. They were disarmed, their hands bound with their own lariats. They stared at the ground, their faces ashen. But Josie's eyes were fixed on the leader, Hastin Tso. He had dismounted. He was standing apart from his men, his back to her. He was holding the baby. Josie walked toward him, her legs unsteady. "Is he?" Hastin Tso turned. His face was a map of a pain so deep it was bottomless. He was a man who had lost his wife, and until an hour ago thought he had lost his son. He looked at Josie. He looked at the blood on her sleeve where the bullet had grazed her. He looked at her face caked with dirt and tear tracks. Then he looked down at his son. The baby was wrapped in Kea's blanket. He was still. "He is alive," Hastin Tso said. His voice was a low rumble. "My son. He is named Navajo." He stepped forward. Josie flinched, but he didn't stop. He stood directly in front of her, so close she could see the grief etched around his eyes. He held the baby out. Josie was confused. "What?" "You," he said. "He knows your smell. He knows your heart." He placed the baby back into her arms. Dagao, who had been frighteningly still, let out a tiny, weak sigh and seemed to settle his face, turning toward her. A profound, shattering understanding passed between the chief and the frontier girl. He didn't just see her as a rescuer, he saw her as a mother. Hastin Tso looked at his warriors. He looked at the bound, pathetic figures of Fry and Kester. Then he looked back at Josie. "You saved the blood of my blood," he said. "You fought for him. A Daini warrior fights for his people. You fought for my people." He reached out and touched the turquoise amulet, which now rested against Josie's coat. "My wife, Zanibar, she wove the blanket. She tied this stone. The man..." He gestured to Fry. "He took her silver, but he did not get this. He did not get her son." I am so sorry," Josie whispered, tears welling up again. "For your wife. Grief is mine," Hastin Tso said, his voice thick. "But life is his." Kea stepped forward, holding a water skin. "My grandmother, the healer. She is coming. She is just beyond the ridge." As if summoned, an older woman appeared, riding astride like a man. She slid off her horse and came directly to Josie, ignoring everyone else. She was Azza Tso, the old woman. She was ancient, her face a nest of wrinkles, but her eyes were bright and sharp as obsidian. She took the baby from Josie, her hands practiced. and sure. She listened to his chest, clicked her tongue, and began giving sharp orders in the Navajo language. A small fire was started. Herbs were produced from a leather pouch. Hastinso turned his attention to the prisoners. "This one," he said, pointing to Fry, "is a murderer. He is a thief. He will be taken to the white soldiers at Fort Wingate. He will hang by their law. It is just." He looked at Kester. "This one is a coward. He will be let go. He will walk back." "Walk," Kester squeaked. "It's 50 miles. There is the land," Hastinso said, his voice void of all mercy. "You will tell all other Bilagaana what happens when you hunt children in our canyons." He turned back to Josie. The healer was working, feeding the baby a dark, steaming liquid from a shell. The baby coughed, sputtered, and then for the first time let out a loud, angry, healthy cry. The sound was life. Every warrior, including the chief, visibly relaxed. "He will live," Hastinso said. It was a statement of fact. "What about me?" Josie asked, her voice small. Hastinso looked at her. He looked at her torn sleeve, her father's massive coat, her bare hands. He saw the tracks of her limping shod horse. "You are Josephine Reed," he said. "Daughter of Hezekiah. Your home is by the muddy river." Josie was stunned. You know my father." "We know all our neighbors," the chief said. "We know the hard man who keeps to himself. And now we know his daughter, who does not." He motioned to Kea. "You will take her home. Take her father's horse. Bring it to her." "Thank you," Josie whispered. "But I can find my own way." "No." Hastinso said, his voice final. "You will not ride alone. Not ever again in this land. You are Shash Yaoj, Little Bear. You are a friend to the Dene. You will be protected." He looked at the setting sun, which was painting the canyon walls in blood red and gold. "Go. Your father worries." He put his hand on his heart, then held it out to her. It was the sign of respect, the sign of thanks. Josie, clutching the rifle, her heart full of a strange, aching mixture of sorrow and peace, nodded. She turned and began the long walk back with Kea at her side, leaving the chief and his men to their justice and his son to his people. It was well after midnight when Josie and Kea reached the homestead. Kea had found Buster, and the horse, though still limping, had carried her the last few miles. A single lantern burned in the cabin window. As they approached, the door flew open. Hezekiah stood there, his rifle in his hands, his face a mask of sleepless terror. He saw Josie covered in dirt and blood. Then he saw the tall Navajo warrior beside her. He raised his rifle. "No, Pa!" Josie yelled, sliding off Buster, her legs buckling. "Pa, stop! He's a friend! He's Kea! He saved me!" Hezekiah stared, his eyes wide, as his daughter stumbled into his arms. "Josie!" "My girl, I thought Fry. I heard the shots, hours ago, from the east. I thought." "Fry is gone," Josie said, her voice muffled against his chest. "He won't be back. Ever. And the baby?" "Pa, the baby is safe. He's home. His name is Daghau." Hezekiah looked over her head at Kea, who sat on his horse, watching them with a quiet, unreadable expression. Hezekiah, in a gesture that must have cost him every ounce of his pride, slowly lowered the rifle. He gave a stiff, formal nod. Kea nodded back. "She is Shash Yaj," he said. He pointed to his own chest. "Kea, we are Kai." Hezekiah didn't understand the word. Kai, a complex term for peace, family, and kinship. But he understood the tone. Kea turned his horse, and without another word melted back into the darkness. Josie spent the next day in a state of exhausted shock. She told her father and Tom the whole story, the pursuit, the fight, the arrival of Hastinso, the dead bodies by the river, Fry's capture. Hezekiah listened, his face growing paler and paler. He sat by the cold hearth for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, he looked at his daughter. "You," he said, his voice rough. "You did a right thing. A hard thing, but a right thing. You are your mother's daughter, through and through, and a bigger fool than I ever was." He tried to make it sound like an insult, but his voice cracked. Life fell into its old rhythm, but everything was different. The silence of the prairie no longer felt empty. It felt watchful. Josie kept looking to the east, half expecting to see riders. A week passed, then 2. Nothing. The quiet was almost as loud as the gunshots had been. Then, one night, just as a sliver of moon was rising, Tom called from the porch. "Josie, Pa, riders." Hezekiah and Josie came out. 3 figures were approaching, not from the east, but from the north. They rode slowly, their forms dark against the horizon. They were not a war party. They stopped 20 yards from the cabin. The man in the center dismounted. It was Hastin Tso. He was not in his warrior's paint. He wore a fine woven blanket, and his silver concho belt gleamed in the moonlight. The 2 men with him led a pack horse. This was not a pursuit. This was a diplomatic visit. "Hastin Tso," Josie said, stepping forward. Hezekiah stayed on the porch, his hand near the door, but he made no move for his rifle. "Little Bear," the chief replied. He smiled, a small, rare thing. "I told my council I rode all night to thank you. It was not true. It took me 2 weeks. The journey is long." He motioned to his men. They began unloading the pack horse. "My son Dag Hao is strong. He fights, like you." "I am glad," Josie said, her heart swelling. "His grandmother, her medicine. Her medicine is strong, but your heart was stronger. You took him from the river. You warmed him. You fed him. You rode to us, not from us. This is a story that will be told by my grandchildren." The men laid the gifts on the ground. They were not trinkets. There were 3 thick, beautifully woven blankets. There was a large sack of blue cornmeal, and a side of cured deer meat. But the last gift was for Josie. Hastin Tso stepped forward and held out a string of polished silver and turquoise beads. It was heavy and cool in her hand. "This is not," he said, "a payment. Life cannot be paid for. This is K. This is so all who see you will know that you are a friend to the Diné. The land is hard. It does not need to be made harder by men. You were not hard." Hezekiah had stepped off the porch. He stood beside his daughter, his hat in his hands. He looked at the chief, at the gifts, and at his daughter. He cleared his throat. "Chief," he said, his voice rusty. "Our home. You are welcome. We have coffee." Hastin Tso looked at the hard, fearful settler, who had, in his own way, let his daughter do the right thing. He nodded. "Coffee," he said. Thank you." As the 3 men sat by the fire, 2 fathers from 2 different worlds, drinking bitter coffee in a small sod cabin, Josie stood on the porch, the cool silver beads in her hand. The wind still had its voice, but for the first time in her life, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like a promise. The frontier was defined by its sharp, brutal edges, the line between settler and native life, and death survival and morality. Josie Reed, with nothing but a stubborn heart and a sense of right, walked right over that line and refused to look back. She didn't just save a child. She built a bridge. The story of Hastin Tso's ride isn't just about a thank you. It's about a recognition, a profound moment where 2 warring worlds stopped, looked at each other, and saw their shared humanity, all because one girl refused to let a baby die alone by the river. If this story of courage and conscience in the Wild West moved you, please help us share it. These are the histories that deserve to be told. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a true story of the West, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell. We have so many more stories to tell.